All right, welcome everyone. And thank you for joining for tonight's event. For those of you who are participating by Zoom, this is simultaneously being interpreted in English and Spanish. So please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen to the menu bar and press on the icon, on the globe icon on the bottom of the menu bar. And you'll see us where you can select the language, either English or Spanish. So there's a menu bar on the bottom with a globe. Click the globe and then select your language, English or Spanish.
Bienvenidos. Gracias por acompañarnos al evento de hoy. Este es un evento con interpretación simultánea al español y al inglés. Por favor, vaya a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, a la barra de menú y presione en el icono con forma de globo para seleccionar el idioma que prefiere para escuchar el evento de hoy. Debe seleccionar español o inglés. Seleccione uno de los dos idiomas.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Williams. I'm a partner at the law firm of Hutchinson, Black & Cook. And welcome to our third in a series of panel discussions on the roots of today's racial exclusion in Boulder County and the road ahead. Today's panel focuses on the history of the Latino experience in Boulder County. And I'd like to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the CU Law School, who's hosting us here today, the CU Latinx Student Association, the CU Native American Law Student Association, the CU Black Law Student Association, the NAACP of Boulder County, the Museum of Boulder, Center for the American West, and blackpast.org. We're grateful for all the co-sponsors. Before introducing our moderator, I'd just like to take a moment to explain why we're hosting this community discussion about race in Boulder County. In the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020, Hutchinson, Black & Cook undertook an examination of what we could do to help dismantle systemic discrimination. And this seminar series is a part of that effort, recognizing that the first step to dismantling systemic discrimination as a community is to acknowledge how we got where we are today. So we hosted about a year ago a discussion of the history of exclusion of Black people in Boulder County. And then last fall, we hosted a community discussion on the treatment of Native Americans in Boulder County, including the violence that's been committed against that community. Both of those are available through our website. And we're exceedingly excited about tonight's presentation. Now, in planning tonight's presentation, we did learn an uncomfortable truth about ourselves, which really isn't surprising given that Hutchinson, Black & Cook as a law firm is 125 years old and it's been in this community that whole time. One of the things you're going to hear about tonight from one of our panelists is a community swimming pool that opened in 1934 in Lafayette. And when it opened, it excluded Latinos from using it. And you're going to hear how 25 Latino families, led by Rose Lueres, banded together and brought a civil rights suit to challenge that. And you're also going to hear that one of the founding partners of Hutchinson, Black & Cook, Dudley Hutchinson Sr., represented the defendant in that lawsuit, the city of Lafayette, in trying to keep the swimming pool segregated. So what does a law firm like ours, whose partners today care so deeply about social justice, do when we discover this about our collective history? We acknowledge our firm's role in creating the pillars of discrimination in Boulder County. And we tell you that we regret it. We don't shy away from acknowledging white privilege. And we simultaneously work to end the barriers that our forefathers put in place. The truth about how Boulder became such a segregated community may be difficult for us to confront, but only by acknowledging these hard truths can we act with integrity in changing things. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's fantastic panel, Nikki Gonzalez. Born and raised in Denver, Nikki has deep roots in the coal mining and agricultural communities of northern and southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. Like so many Mexican Americans in the region, her grandparents moved to Denver during World War II for economic reasons. Nikki's a graduate of Yale University with a BA in English Literature. Then she got a PhD in American History from CU Boulder. Currently, she serves as a professor of history and vice provost of diversity and inclusion at Regis University. She specializes in the history of the American West, specifically the history of Mexican land grants, the Sangre de Cristo land grant, and social movements in southern Colorado, as well as Chicano history. Her most recent work is on the history of Chicano Vietnam veterans. She recently led the engagement part of the City of Denver's Latino, Chicano, Mexican American historic context. She's also the mother of two boys, Danny and Teddy. And Nikki currently serves as the Colorado State Historian. Thank you for being here, Nikki.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you for attending tonight's panel. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Now, okay. I think it's working now. Thank you to Jim Carpenter and his wonderful team from the law firm and CU Boulder for hosting us tonight. And thank you all to the law firm for sponsoring this larger anti-racism effort. I really admire the fact that you're taking the initiative to have these events. They're very important. I'm honored to be part of something that includes these experts on our panel today. They are all impressive on their own and dynamite as a trio, so I'm really excited. A little bit about our format tonight. So each of the panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, introducing themselves, their work, their areas of specialization, and highlighting some of the research that they've done. And then I have a few questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to you all. So why? Why do we talk about this history? I've heard many people throughout my career say, why don't you just leave that in the past? Right? What's done is done. Today's a new day. Why can't we just move on? What good can come from examining the history of Latinos in Boulder County or Colorado or the United States? In 1965, African-American writer James Baldwin wrote the following. He said, history, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it with us. We are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations. Close quote. Only by understanding one another's history can we come to truly know and appreciate one another as friends, as neighbors, and as colleagues. And only through this understanding can we work to overcome the inequities of yesteryear and today. This is true for individuals as well as for us as a collective society. Our institutions, structures, laws, housing patterns, schools, and economic distribution are all shaped by history. In this historic moment of racial reckoning, one we've been at many times before, we have the opportunity to dig deep and to understand how we got here. Our panelists tonight will talk much more eloquently and in much more detail than I will about how this pertains to Boulder County. One of the questions I will pose to the panel, and one which I'd like you all to think about, takes us beyond just an examination of the past, but to an assessment based on our newfound knowledge of Boulder County's history of racism, white supremacy, and of the Latino community's resilience and creativity in the face of those challenges. The question I will ask the panelists and you all is a question that Dr. King posed in 1967. Where do we go from here? Our panelists tonight, I'll briefly introduce them. Donna Lovato. Donna has been the executive director of El Comité de Longmont since 2017. She leads El Comité in so many of the impressive services that they provide for the Latino community, from tutoring services to job assistance to providing food for those who need it. I hope she will share some of those tonight. Donna has a BA in sociology from CU Boulder and attended DU Law School. Recently, she was involved in the revision and expansion of the second edition of We Too Came to Stay, a history of the Longmont Hispanic community, published in 2021. I should note that I met Donna at the book signing event a few months ago, where the enthusiasm for her research, her leadership, and her role in the community was palpable. Richard Garcia. Richard is seventh generation Mexican American. He was born and raised in Monte Vista, Colorado, in the beautiful San Luis Valley, God's country as I grew up thinking of it. He moved to Boulder to attend the University of Colorado in 1970, and after he graduated, decided to stay here in Boulder. Since that time, Richard has founded several nonprofits. He also served as the executive director and founder of the Colorado statewide Parent Coalition for 38 years. He co-founded Amistad, the Latino Task Force, and many more. Richard has served on many boards and commissions locally and statewide. He is currently a member of the Boulder Valley School Board of Education and has been appointed to serve on the Board of Trustees for the Colorado Community College System. Richard received his BA in Political Science from CU and Master's in Education, also from CU. Richard's commitment to justice and equity have made differences in the lives of many in the past 5 decades. Our third panelist, Frank Archuleta here, is a historian through and through. I've never met a more pure historian, historian for the city of Lafayette. In learning more about Frank's research, I have become more and more impressed with his tenacity in capturing stories that have been buried for decades. In December of 2021, Frank was recognized as the 2021 recipient of the International Human Rights Award from the United Nations of Boulder County. The award is given out annually to nominees who have demonstrated leadership and impact in building a more inclusive, just, and equitable society in Boulder County and beyond. Frank will share with you his vast research that he has conducted, and that is now part of an exhibit that will open very soon here, called Racism and Discrimination at the Lafayette Swimming Pool in 1934. Frank was also instrumental in getting this history into the school curriculum. As I said, I'm very honored to know our panelists tonight, as they are true advocates for anti-racism and equity. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Frank, who will start us off.
Thank you, Nikki. It's a privilege and an honor. I am humbled and I am grateful, and I'd like to thank Mr. Jim Parker for allowing me this opportunity to speak from the heart and educate the citizens in the disgraceful tragedy of racism and discrimination in Boulder County. The Boulder County Latino History Exhibit will be held at the Museum of Boulder, and it will run till next year, till February 26th of next year. Racism and Discrimination Exhibit will be also in Lafayette, and that will be April 6th to the 29th. And June 15th through August 15th, it will be held at the Museum of Boulder. And with this exhibit, we just recently received the History Colorado Award, Caroline Bank. I will now speak the truth to the power. We cannot overlook the enormous acceleration of racism. Racism is America's original sin. 530 years of racism and discrimination. Genocide to the Native Americans. Over 400 years of racism and discrimination and oppression to the neighborhood blacks. The United States was founded on white supremacy. The Constitution was written by the white man for the white man. The manifest destiny was to steal the Native Americans' lands. The principal function of racist ideas in American history has been to suppress resistance to racial disparities, racial inequities, and racial injustice. We cannot erase the facts of true history. Let us take a long, hard look of our history in Boulder County and in the town of Lafayette. Lafayette and Mary Miller came to the area in 1863. They named their first son Thomas Jefferson. As we all know, Thomas Jefferson, president, was a slaveholder, and he also raped young black girls. The Arapahoes lived in Boulder County. All of a sudden, they were run out. We call this racial cleansing. Sand Creek Massacre, December 28th and 29th. Governor Shipton proclaimed a 100-day militia to go kill Native Americans. Colonel John Sivington had over 700 at school. Captain David Nichols, Company D, 3rd Regiment out of Fort Chambers, Boulder here, and they were farmers and they were miners. Granville Berkeley, Judas Berkeley would turn around and marry Lafayette's sister, Alfreda. These are all tied together, these early pioneers here. Morris Cotton, Lafayette Mill and them did the threshing on the farms for him. William Dickinson, Henry Foster, George Harmon, Captain Thomas Atkins, and John Rockwood. They built the log cabins at Settlers Park in 1858 here. They went out to Sand Creek and they killed anywhere from 100 to 200 Native Americans, mostly women and children here, Arapahoes and Cheyennes. Colonel Shiverson's famous battle cry, kill them all, big and small, mix make life. And the old stories that General Sheridan used to always say, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Back to Fort Chambers, back to Denver, they went to the Falls Theater with the body parts. Marched right back to Lafayette, back to Valmont here. Now, this is how racism started in Lafayette here. Lafayette Miller dies in Boulder in 1878. Mary Miller was from alcoholism, basically. He had bright disease of the kidneys and derangement of the liver here. Lafayette, after that time, Mary comes back to her father's farm in Lafayette there, and goes ahead and plants Lafayette in 1888 and 1889. She had a deed restriction as far as alcohol could not be served or given away on the premises, or else everything would be taken back. The institutional tribal politics of white supremacist and dictator Mary Miller and family caused a disgraceful tragedy of racism and discrimination in the town of Lafayette. Mary's power structure. She owned the property and she was the president of the Lafayette Bank. Mary Miller wanted to establish 100% American, wholesomeness, purity, Protestant, temperance town. This was the beginning of racism and discrimination in the town of Lafayette, and it continued for many years after Mary's death. Alma White held revival services in Lafayette in 1894. She had written 4 books on the Ku Klux Klan. Mary Miller did selling the property to Latinos, did getting bank loans, or didn't hire out of mine. Jerry Arnold had 3 saloons burned down within 8 months. Mary's organization, the Lafayette Good Timbers, put in the newspaper, were glad to see the saloon burned down. Mary Miller's organization, the Lafayette Chapter, the International Order of the Good Timbers, they had ties to KKK, Lafayette Law and Order, the Order of the Eastern Star, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. In 1898, the Women's Christian Temperance Union established heredity and health committee, some academics that was interpreted as eugenics. The Latinos in Lafayette were being shot, Latinos were torn together in that town, Catholics and Chinese were run out of town. We had the sundown school. This was a bad time for minorities living in Lafayette. In 1906, the Catholic Church was building, and all of a sudden, the lovers started disappearing. 1906, James D. Miller and Mayor Benson, they go to the Colorado Northern Coke Company, and they want them to hire in Greeks. As we all know, the Greeks drink, the Chicanos drink, the Catholics drink during communion. That's what they didn't want. They wanted an all-white, basically, town. That's what Mary Miller wanted. I'm going to Ku Klux Klan now. In 1910, the powerful Klansmen agreed to form in Longmont. 1960, D. W. Griffiths, the Birth of the Nation, premiered at the Lafayette Jewish Theater on October 25, 1916. Lafayette had over 200 Klan members. They were town board members, fire department, Lions Club, school board members, church pastors, business owners, and citizens. Lafayette Mary Miller's son, George Miller, and grandson Ralph, Frank, and Faye, they all had ties to the Ku Klux Klan. Faye would lead the Klan on his white horse. 1933-1934, Lafayette was building a swimming pool there, and they asked for donations of local water. She donated 10 sacks of cement, more than anybody else in the community there. Time to swim in the pool, the town board conspires with the fire department, and the fire department to lease it out, and they go ahead, and it was time to swim in the pool July 31st. The fire department puts up a sign, white trade only. The Latino families were World War I veterans, they were union coal miners, and their children couldn't get in that pool. Rosenstein's goes ahead and files a lawsuit August 14, 1934 against the city of Lafayette and the fire department. Within 1 week after the suit went in, the KKK marches for Boulder Rec Center is now in Lafayette. That's where the swimming pool used to be, marching up and down the streets, basically terrorizing the Latinos. There were so many, according to the newspapers, they couldn't count them. They came throughout the entire town. Latinos tried to get into a dance. It was in September the 3rd, 1934, down at Hawthorne, down on Simpson Street. Well, what happened, they went into the dance, the police used tear gas at it to break it up. Evidently, the tear gas goes upstairs, and it breaks up the little boys up there also. The members of the Ku Klux Klan and the citizens of Lafayette movement caused injustice, racism, discrimination, and pain to the Latinos, Negroes, Chinese, Italians, and Catholics in Lafayette. The Millers were resistant to the reality of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. Corruption of justice is evil. When any form of government becomes subversive of the right of man or woman, it is the duty of the people to abolish it. What a disgrace would happen in the town of Lafayette, the Latinos, Negroes, Chinese, Greeks, and Italianos. As we all know, Italianos, Carolinos, they drink a lot of wine. The effects of historical trauma have been devastating for the Latinos of Lafayette. Why is it that the city of Lafayette only had 3 Latinos, 1 Black, 1 Chinese, and 2 Latina council members in over 130 years? Is it because of racism, discrimination, or lack of trust? Now, the Millers are accused of controlling the town. The Millers are accused as far as basically controlling government, as far as county, judges, sheriff, and even the governor's office at that time. Both Mary Miller's banks have defrauded the communities of Lafayette. United Miners had $57,581 in the bank, and they tried for 2 years unsuccessfully to draw their funds out. That would have been equivalent in 2017 to over $600,000. Lawsuits happened. Boulder County Treasurer, 1913, by the auditor's suggestion, they pulled their money out of the banks. James Miller, later on, stole the money and went to Texas. 1924, the Lafayette Fire Department, they went and went to Texas. Who did they bring into the city park with 3,000 people? Ben Stapleton. Mary Miller and Sammons created societies that were defined as race separate and equal, and it was a division of class and race. Today in the city of Lafayette, we are building a healthy, just, inclusive community, and we believe in social justice and equity for all. We are educating the citizens of the tragedy of institutional racism, discrimination, which caused historical trauma to the Latino families of Lafayette. It is time for positive change. It is time to dismantle structural racism, which is inexcusable, and education is our greatest tool in understanding and combating racism and discrimination. It is most essential weapon against oppression. We should not learn from our history. For too long, we have not been addressing the silences that we've been avoiding and telling the true full stories of systemic racism and how it manifested in Lafayette. It is time to respect, honor, and value the Latino families and Lafayette, where their journey has been very hard. Now, to all you students and all you citizens out there, use your voice to continue your education. Be brave and have moral courage. Our work is not finished. Fight for social justice, democracy, and help break the cycle of racism and discrimination. For racism is a problem for humanity. Show your love and have a heart and keep your faith. Have respect and value all humans. Show compassion and be kind. Be honest to yourself and keep your dignity. Equal rights, equity, liberty, justice, and equality for all. And please, do not forget the poor people. I ask you all to stand with us for racial justice, righteousness, unity, solidarity, to fight racism and discrimination. Now I'm going to give some historical facts here. The roots of American racism and racist policies, institutional racism, imperialism, capitalism, oppression, colonialism, greed, prejudice, bigotry, and racial discrimination. The brilliant, powerful men and women have produced racist ideas in order to justify the racist policies of their era. Racist policies were created out of self-interest. Racial inequities are the result of racist policies. There is enormous value in education and providing the history and framework to be identified why the society looks the way it does, and understanding that all of this was done not by accident, but by design. We must not forget our history. The implications of forgetting would be detrimental to the future generations who would have a historical grounding to understand why racial prejudice and inequities have prevailed throughout the world here. In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. I ask you, do not be blind to the reality of racism. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It is time to dismantle structural racism and banish racism and have a commitment to make justice a reality for all. There is no room in America for racism of any color. We must break the chains of racism. We must stop racism. We must have racial equality, social justice, and we must stand for human rights and respect human rights. It is time to show some action and some compassion here. Now I'm going back to the 1934 swim pool issue here. The lawsuit went in August the 13th, 1934. They ran those around us out of town. They were burning crosses throughout the entire community. She moved to Santa Monica, California. On June 17, 1935, 23 days before the court happened, they ran over her. They killed her in Santa Monica, California. Her 13-year-old daughter had to come back and testify at the court hearings here. They filed under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States and as far as the Bill of Rights of Colorado, 1921 Civil Rights Statute. Boulder, Judge Kaufman states, race and color should not be made the basis of discrimination. It is clearly, of course, against our laws and penalties are provided. Even though testimony from fireman and town councilman Joe Mathias and fireman Frank Baddick testified that they were discriminating against the Mexicans, they didn't want to swim in the pool. So that's why they reached it out to the fire department. Now, the attorneys for the Title CA Penalties filed an appeal resorting the 1895 Civil Rights Act of Colorado Mills Appointment Statutes right law 1895 forbidding racial discrimination at public schools. It goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court sided with Boulder Court. The pool in Los Angeles was for 2 weeks. They filled it up with dirt in 1936 here. Shame, for too long the public has been deceived by the misrepresentation of Mary Miller and her family. I asked you to step back into the Miller time, and what do you think would happen to you all and your family? Well, how would y'all felt? We need culture transformation and action, change in values and a change in policies to promote the kind of society we want the city of Lafayette. I believe a stronger sense of empathy would tilt the balance of the current politics. Our moral and spiritual leg must be redeemed. We must have moral reawakening. I have exposed the immoral, shameful, evil issues of disease, of racism, racist attitudes, political policy, the corruption, social injustice, the prejudice, ugly discrimination of white supremacists, Mary Miller and her Ku Klux Klan family. White power structures of recklessness, the abuse of the ideology of the racial hierarchy, and the force of political power of social economics, and dedicated preserving the status quo white privilege. The city of Lafayette is contributing to racism, even still now, and we are working with them on several issues here. Now, what I'd like to talk about, if any of you out there want to get any information, you can obtain the documentation as far as the court trials and transcripts from the Wolf Library right here. This is where we picked it all from. Now, I would like to thank Rachel Hansen for all of her accomplishments. I myself and Rachel Hansen, we will go and do a presentation to the Human Rights Board in Lafayette. On November the 4th, the presentation went to the Lafayette City Council, and we asked them to name the swimming pool after Roseville Waters. Well, the city of Lafayette, they did name the pool at the Boulder Rec Center after Roseville Waters. Now, on July the 20th, basically, we had a petition in Lafayette going because what happened was Robert Haas and Bourbon Company, they built in Lafayette a $44 million housing complex with the city hall skids, and they named it the Miller Complex. We have over 900 people on the petition. We went ahead and we fought against both entities there, and what they did basically, finally, January 2021, they changed the name to Mira, which means look or in Spanish there, and then in Latin it means wonderful. They did change the name, so we accomplished that. 2020, with Rachel Hansen here, we developed 9 panels telling the story of discrimination at the town in 1934 swim pool, as Roseville Waters and her daughter Rosabella and other Latino community members fought for their civil rights. And I thank Rachel, she was a collective arts center of the city of Lafayette, so we're on conjunction with the city and working on all these different projects. In July 2021, I met with Assistant Superintendent Michael Rodos and Jennifer, the Director of the Curriculum, and asked them to include the Boulder Valley School District racial discrimination at the Lafayette Swim Pool in 1934. On September the 12th, 2021, we had a dedication ceremony with a sign put outside the Boulder Rec Center telling the true story of racial discrimination when it happened. At this time, I'd like to thank everybody that's collaborated with us, the City of Lafayette, the Human Rights Commission, Melissa Heisel, the director of the library here. As far as I thank Rachel so hardly, she's been with this fight since the get-go here. We have other historians in there that also have that, Karen Norback house, Doug Connell's house is out here, the Latino families of Lafayette, the Lafayette BMW. And then Marty McIntosh here, wrote the books of Latino history here. As far as also, basically, I'm almost running out of time here, but I can continue, but I'd like to thank everybody who have participated within this. Thank Mr. Hutchinson, and I'd like to thank Richard here, I'd like to thank Nikki here, and my heart goes out to Rachel Hansen, because there was Rachel Hansen in the city of Lafayette, in conjunction as far as 2 partnerships, none of this would have not happened. We would have been able to break the barrier of racial discrimination in Lafayette. I thank you all, and I'd like you all to attend the board museum, and then come back into Lafayette and attend visiting as far as to see the panels there. You can all contact Richard Hanson, and I'm going to give a telephone number real quick, last thing I'm going to say. Washington Collective, 303-661-1261, and that way you can see the exhibit online and it goes a lot of story. Thank you very much, I appreciate it, and I respect you all, and you all have a wonderful evening, and may peace be with you all in harmony. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks so much for that. Such passion. Thank you so much. I'm glad to stay there.
Donna.
Yes, please.
I'm gonna stand up because you know what, if I sit back, my feet don't touch the ground. I know, and then you won't be able to see me. I have to tell you the story. I went to do a talk at a church and their preacher was like 10 feet probably. And they built the pulpit just for him. So when I got back there, like everybody disappeared except the back row. And then I said, where did you go? And then they all started laughing, and I started laughing, and then that's maybe mine. So you can see me in there. I'm Donald Lotto, I'm the executive director at Comité. And we've come a long way since it started back in 1980. Two young Latino men were shot in Longmont by two Longmont police officers. And the Latino community was outraged. They marched to city council and with 1,000 names on a petition talking in terms of the relations between the police department and the Latino community needed to change. And since then, there has been a lot of change. They developed what would be equivalent to like an ombudsman's office. It was the community relations coordinator office. Now it's like the neighborhood office. I'm not sure the exact title. We still work really well with them. We have a real good relationship with the police department now. You know, the stuff is still there. So that's kind of it. What Comité does in a nutshell is we help people who want to become citizens as long as they have a permanent resident card. We renew their green cards. We have ESL classes, GED classes, the citizenship test classes. I should have brought the test and given you guys a test, probably all would have failed. That's it. Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard test, 100 questions. And you know, they ask you 10. If you pass 6, you pass the test, but you don't know what 6 they're going to ask you. Anyway, and then we do what we call self-sufficiency through case management. So people come in if they have an issue with school, or they have an issue with the courts, or really whatever, if they need food, if they can't pay the rent. So we have collaborations with different people in the community. I'll tell you a really quick story. I'm a good storyteller, so bear with me. Safe. Safe Shelter in Longmont had done everything they could. They had all their material in Spanish. They had their staff Spanish speakers, and the women were not coming. So then when I came into El Comité, I said, you know, why don't you come and have an office here at El Comité? And so when women would say those things like, you know, they don't say, I'm a victim of domestic violence, and they say, you know, my husband pushes me around, or he doesn't give me money, or whatever, you know, all the classic stuff. And so we would say, you know what, we have somebody here, maybe you should talk to them. And because people trusted El Comité, they would trust Mary Jo, and then Mary Jo would see him at our office a couple times, and then she'd take him to her office. And we've been doing this collaboration like for 2 years. And for the first time, probably last year, they had 3 Spanish-speaking women in the shelter. They had never had that. And they started the first Spanish-speaking support group. So that was really cool. So that's kind of, sorry guys, I don't know why allergies on here, but so that's kind of what we do. We work a lot with the community. Well, kind of backing up a little bit, Longmont was established, I guess, for lack of a better word, in 1873 by some folks that came from Chicago. So they wrote a book, and it said something like, we came, or something, I don't know. And so, but they didn't put no history about the Latino community, and they were there. And so the Latino community decided, well, wait a minute, let's write something together. So it was the Longmont Hispanic Study Group, the Longmont Senior Services, and El Comité. Of course, Martha, I don't have to give her, respect. She was a real big part of this. They formed a committee, and they wrote a book that was called We Too Came to Stay. And it talked about people from within the community. There was probably, I'm going to tell you, 9 different families back then, all Latino, the Cardenas, the Cordovas, the Gallegos, Gonzalez, Sister Rosa, everybody knows Longmont, everybody knows Sister Rosa. Well, the woman who wrote these books, her name was Oli Olivas. And she was basically and I'm gonna be like that, right, this circle. She wrote the first part of the book. Well, then she had started with 6 other stories. And they were just sitting in the cabinet. I remember Mark and I would always talk about, we need to read, make another book. And then Martha retired, and Marjorie McIntosh, who we all loved, her and I talked, and she actually said, let's do it. And of course I said, okay. And so we did this book, and it's, we too came to stay. It's a revised edition. What's really cool about this book is the first part of the book are the 11 original, or the 9 original people that wrote there. And then it gives a part about, like us who came here. I always say my family didn't cross the border crossed us. They went to bed one night, they're Mexicanos, they woke up the next day and they were American citizens. And they never taught us Spanish, so they knew Spanish and they keep secrets from us by speaking Spanish, but they didn't teach it to us. I had to learn at Garcia, which is really a riot, a Garcia student. One semester you'll have someone from Venezuela, and then the next you'll have someone from Spain, and they do los otros, and then you talk to them for a long time. And I make fun of them, but it's true. And then you get Mexico, and so you're kind of confused when you get out of the Spanish here. And I always know when I say something wrong because people will say, cat, and I'm like, okay. I start saying, Marta, what did I say? And sometimes it wasn't very nice. Anyway, so I don't know. Anyway, so if you look at this book, it really shows what part of the United States belonged to Mexico. And what's really cool, I'm gonna say cool, but I mean that in a very kind of sad way. When I was reading this book, you have to have your Kleenex out, people remember, like say, when they wrote the book in 1988, and then the second one we did just last year, 2021, when the Boy Scouts shot in 1980, people remember the signs from the 60s and even early 70s that said, we white trade only, or they would say the no N-word, no Mexicans, no dogs. So for example, they said that if you wanted a hamburger, if you were white, you could go through the front door, that's all in the book. You could go to the front door and pay like $2 for a hamburger or $1. But if you were Latino, Chicano, Mexicano, you'd go through the back door, and they would charge you $2 for that same hamburger. It also talks about a man whose son had gone to Vietnam, and he came back. So Vietnam was in the 70s, well, everybody was ending. And he was so proud of his son, and he was home, he was happy, and thought, I'm gonna take my son out to get a beer. So he took him to a bar, a pub, whatever, there in Longmont. And when they walked in, the guy wouldn't serve him. He said, can't you read the sign? It says no, whatever, white trade only. And he was so upset, he got the full stick and he broke the sign, and they called the cops. He didn't get in trouble. The cops told the bar owner, you have to serve him, civil rights people. Anyway, he said, I would drink a beer. My son went across the world to fight for your rights, and you won't even give him a beer. And so it talks about stuff like that. It talks about people who, a family, they would come to work in the farms, and they would get up super early to walk, like, an hour and a half to get to where they were gonna go pick the beets or whatever they were gonna pick. Then they would come home, they would eat dinner, they would prepare lunch for the next day, and then they would fall asleep, and that was their life. And so it talks about all that. It talks about how lucky a family was when they had a vehicle, and as many people as they could would get in, and they would be able to go places. It talks about some families owned, like where the Longmont Mall is right now. Have you ever been there? He's like, if my family hadn't sold it, we'd be bazillionaires. I'm like, I know, yeah. So anyway, so like I say, it's a cool book. Riley, raise your hand, Riley. Riley is my staff at Comité. She's my development coordinator. We're selling these books, and actually, it's a fundraiser for El Comité. As a nonprofit, we have no shame. We're always asking for money. So, the books are $25. I'll even sign it for you. I have a one-pager, and it's actually kind of cool. Yeah, and so, it's just really important, and kind of like what Frank says, here we are, 2022, and discrimination, racism is so alive and well. And in fact, I'm going to use Riley as my example. This week, like on Monday, she went and got her driver's license. Not a big deal, it expired. She went in, they gave it to her, she walked out. Yesterday, my other staff, Rosie Quiros, and she knows I share this story. She went in, her license had expired, so she had the license. And she had her passport, United States passport. And the woman said, I think that's fake. And then she took her driver's license away. They took her picture because now she was going to be under investigation. It's like, really? For what? She came back, she was so mad. I said, you know what? You don't get mad, let's call people. So we called Boulder County, reported them, and guess what? The next day she gets called, go pick up your license, it's there. Because we also called the state, and we also filed a complaint with civil rights. Because you know what? You have to speak up when you see these injustices. And what's crazy is, I mean, I didn't grow up with Spanish, I kind of faked it, so I made it. But anyway, people will say to me, we don't understand your accent is too thick. I'm like, my accent from Leadville, Colorado, okay. But, so it's still here, and I don't mean to make you laugh, but it's kind of like sometimes if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And part of it is you have to speak up when you see something going on. So anyway, so I don't want to take a lot of time too. We're here, we have our books. If you want me to sign them, I will. Even though I didn't write it, I just talked to the last people, and it was really cool. And I'm going to end it with this. Mr. Archuleta is the last story in the book. And him and I had been talking a lot, and I had made an appointment with him to go have him sign so I could put his story in here. And then he got sent to the hospital, and his son came in from California, and he died like 2 days before we had our book signing. And so we got a book donated to Lyons Library, the public library, and his son took the book back to California. So, and I tell people, we all have a story. Tell your children your story. Tell them the story your grandma used to tell you. Sometimes they get a little crazy, but there was a point behind it. So share your stories, guys. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Donna. Richard.
Muchas gracias. Frank, that was really a powerful story you just said. I hadn't heard it until now. I read it in the paper, but I hadn't heard the details that you just described. And wow, powerful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Frank and I go back a few years, and just to do a shout out to Frank. He, I believe, was the first organizer of the Cinco de Mayo Fiesta in Boulder County. And the Cinco de Mayo Fiesta in Boulder County was at Centaurus High School. You remember that, right? And then from there, it went on to Longmont, and now Longmont, I think, can say that it's the second largest Cinco de Mayo in the state of Colorado, second to Denver, obviously. I came to Boulder in June of 1970 to study under the Migrant Action Program. In the 70s, you had a number, well, in the late 60s into now, you have a number of student organizations. UMAS, United Mexican American Students, was one of them. And I see one of my friends over here, Arturo Jimenez, who's a mechista. But he is a product of UMAS, Mecha, and now a lawyer, an immigration lawyer. Very, very good immigration lawyer. I'm the best I want to share with you a couple of thoughts regarding education, because as the moderator was saying that she comes from studying the land grants in Southeast Valley, and one of the things that we had as students in the University of Colorado was loss of our land education is our standard, and education for me is super important. And I truly believe that education is the #1 avenue to combat racism, and we've got to fix our schools first. And in Boulder Valley, we're doing that. I'll explain a little bit more in terms of what we're doing in Boulder Valley. The Migrant Action Program came to the University of Colorado in 1968, and it was through the efforts of a number of people, the Colorado Migrant Council being one, and then two professors, Howard Higman and Robert Hunter. They were both professors of sociology. And they, Hunter and Higman went to the San Luis Valley to do some VISTA work, and they saw the potential of migrant farm workers or seasonal farm workers because that's what they were working with. So they thought of this wonderful idea in terms of working with the Colorado Migrant Council. Why don't we establish a student organization at the University of Colorado? So they did that in 1968, and in 1968 they brought in, I believe, something like about 17 students. 11 were single students, 6 of them were married students, and then they grew and grew and grew after that. In 1970, when I came to study under the Migrant Action Program, it was, you often hear today from many folks, folks of color in particular, talk about Boulder as being a white community, a super white community. Today, boy, they should have been here in the 60s and 70s. If you think it's white now, it was super white in those days. So I am pleased to know that I can walk into a Safeway store, I can walk into a King Super store, and I see people of color. I hear Spanish spoken all the time, which to me is really, really wonderful. So I came in 1970 I believe it might have been the third cohort of students that were Migrant Action Program students, and because the family housing was not available at that time for us, so they stuck us in a sorority house up on 13th and Aurora, somewhere around there. And there were 7 families living together in the sorority house. It was great. I mean, it was a lot of, it was a community, my own experience in community living. So I really enjoyed that. So when I was studying here at the University of Colorado, I was a poli-sci major, and thinking that I was going to be a lawyer. Didn't pass the ASAP, or what do you call that, the LSAT test, so that went away. But then again, I was involved in education with my kids, and education really got me, and I was taking some classes at the University of Colorado. I took a social linguistics class where they were talking about our bilingual education, and I learned that in 1968, the Bilingual Education Act, the Federal Bilingual Education Act was passed, and they were giving grants to local school districts to implement bilingual education. So a compadre and I went together and we started thinking, okay, maybe we have to write a grant, submit it to the school board, and see if they want to implement bilingual education in our district here. Unfortunately, they didn't. It took a number of meetings that they had to reject that application. The boardrooms were filled with students and with community people, with professors that were talking about the benefits of bilingual ed, but still they wouldn't approve it. So in 1975, Mayor Federico Peña, who used to be an employee of the Chicano Education Project, called me and my compadre into his office in Golden and asked us if we could put some language together for him so that we could, so he could write a bill and give it to a few legislators at the state legislature and see if they could get the Bilingual Education Act of 1975 passed in Colorado. So he did that. At that time, you had Ruben Valdez, who was the Speaker of the House of the state legislature, and Ruben, who was a one-time high school dropout for Southern Colorado, town of Trinidad, remembered also that he never heard about Spanish name like something good in terms of Spanish name while he was in school. There was a freshman senator, Paul Sandoval, that was in the state legislature at that time. These are the sponsors and co-sponsors of the bill, who learned that they never learned that there were more Mexicans inside the Alamo than Anglos when the Alamo was taken. We never knew Pikes Peak originally had a Spanish name. We never knew the word Colorado was a Spanish word. So that's his experience talking in terms of him going to school. Gilbert Cisneros, who was the director of the Chicano Education Project, he reminisced a little bit about attending schools that were 99% Chicano, but had no Chicano teachers. Instead of learning about the holiday of Cinco de Mayo, he said his classes celebrated St. Patrick's Day and sang with Irish eyes are smiling. That's his experiences in education. Federico Peña conceded that he grew up in Texas as Fred, and was so indoctrinated to believe everything Spanish was evil that he did not acknowledge his first real name, his real first name, until he was out of college. So, talk about that internalized oppression that was going on in those days. It is still going on today, from some really, really key leaders in our community. So, can you imagine what's going on with other children in our schools today when they're in monolithic classrooms, when they are maybe 2 or 3 students in a classroom, and on top of that, they're Spanish speakers, can't understand English. So in 1974, in 1973, I ran for the Board of Education here in Boulder Valley. My platform was bilingual ed, multicultural education. Didn't win. However, I did get my platform across to many, many people in Boulder. And in 1975, after the Bilingual Education Act was passed, I was hired as the Bilingual Education Director for Boulder Valley School District, and we had 3 elementary schools that had bilingual ed. Aurora Savin was one of them. Lincoln Elementary, which is now Naropa, and now Lincoln Elementary students, and that whole process moved over to University Hill, which is a dual language immersion program, bilingual program. And then you had Lafayette Elementary had a bilingual program too. That turned into a dual language immersion program at Pioneer Elementary School with the 90-10 model. So you currently have 3 bilingual education schools in Boulder Valley School District, which is Columbine Elementary, which is a hybrid bilingual program. And then you have University Hill, which is a dual language immersion program, 50-50. And Pioneer Elementary School, which is the 9-10 model, where kids go into kindergarten and medium of instruction is 90% Spanish, 10% English, and then they move on. The other key aspects of bilingual education in Boulder Valley School District is that now you have 2 middle schools in Boulder, Casey Middle School, as well as Manhattan School of the Arts, that have some bilingual classes. It's not a bilingual school, but they do have some bilingual classes. Boulder Valley Schools has had a reputation of not being very, very kind to kids of color or Latino students as a result of some very disproportionate issues going on in Boulder Valley Schools, achievement gaps, discipline issues, bullying, all of those things that are occurring in Boulder Valley Schools. They're getting fixed. We're working on them. So we're making some headway. The Latino, the Boulder County Latino History Project, if you're not familiar with it, you should. It's got a lot of great information in there. It talks about Latinos coming into Boulder way back in the 1800s and up until now. We heard the presentation that was done here with the African American community, and we also saw the documentary that was presented at the Boulder Film Festival about African Americans, and it talked about where the African Americans lived. They lived in what they call the jungle in Boulder, but they failed to mention that Latinos lived there too, and many Latinos lived in there. So we do have a history in Boulder Valley, in Boulder County. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that when we talk about the history of Latinos in Boulder County, we need to make sure that people understand that Latinos are the largest ethnic group in Boulder County, but are very frequently, if not always, forgotten in all areas. Political areas, as Frank mentioned, in the history of Lafayette Municipal Council, only, 4 people had served in Lafayette Council. How many? 7. And then in Boulder, you have also maybe 4 or 5 people of color that have served in city council. In the school district, you have 4 Latinos that have served in the Boulder Valley Board of Education. And this is over the years. This is not like it just happened. Currently, we do have finally our first Latina county commissioner elected to serve here in Boulder County. So we're making some headway. But I do want to emphasize that education is critical for all of us. And I just came from Centaurus High School, where Centaurus, Frank will be proud to know this, unless you already know it. Centaurus High School students are presenting a proposal to start an ethnic studies class at Centaurus High School, which is wonderful for us. And hopefully that class comes to a reality. The principal was there and he supported. District leadership was there, they're supportive. I was there, I'm supportive. And we hope to see something happening to implement ethnic studies at Centaurus, and hopefully then it will spread out to other high schools in Boulder Valley School District. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and you ask us the questions you want to ask.
Sure, I think you answered them already. All of you. I told you they were done, Mike. Lucky to be up here with them. Okay, so questions. Let's see, some of them you actually have already addressed, but I think I'll start with the one. So there's a real tendency of governments and people and organizations to see Latinos as a monolith, not acknowledging the diversity within our community. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges. Oh, that's okay. Can you talk about the challenges of educating people, I guess, that we are a very diverse community, and some of the challenges of being a very diverse community. So anyway, that's a question for any of you.
Professor Ramirez. Professor Ramirez from CU conducted a study for Boulder Valley School District, I want to say about 20 years ago, maybe a little longer, to look at the monolithic system that we have as a school district, and he saw how it became so monolithic, and he made a bunch of recommendations to our school district at that time. However, nothing happened with that study, but he was looking at the number of faculty that we have in Boulder Valley schools. Currently, we're doing a better job in terms of having more Latino teachers, Latino administrators in Boulder Valley School District. Not enough. But when he did his study, there were, well, I won't say 0, but there were very few Latino teachers in our school system. The history, the culture, everything that was being taught was very Eurocentric. It had nothing to do with the contributions of people that were here way before even the Europeans got here.
Thank you. Do you want to add? Oh, no, go ahead. Okay.
Okay. All right, can any of you talk about the role of immigration in Latino history in Boulder County?
I can have a look at it. I'm sign up again. Like I said, Archuleta does a lot of work with the immigrant community, and part of our goal is to not to do more harm. You know, what I hate is when people say things like, oh, they're coming in and taking all our jobs and they're getting all our benefits. And I say, tell me where, because I'll send my hand in to get the benefits. There are no, it's crazy. The jobs, we get calls all the time. It's like, hey, you can go work on the farm, or you can go work in landscaping, or people don't want those jobs. So, I can't speak for like where it came from back before in Boulder County, but I can tell you that Archuleta has been doing immigration services for probably 13 years. And so we used to do, every quarter we would do a citizenship processing day, and people could come in, we'd get probably about 20 to 25. And we had attorneys there, we had volunteers from our community, they helped them fill out the applications, the attorneys would review them, and they'd sign in. COVID messed up a lot of that stuff. So, but anyway, so now, thanks to CERT, for example, they came in and did a training for us, and now we do them on the computer every day if they want to. The problem is that to do your citizenship, and please don't quote me on this, it's like $750, let's say. But if they're going to renew their green card, that's like $450. So that big increase in money, most people are choosing to do their renewal of their green cards than they are to get their citizenship. The other thing is it used to take 3 to 6 months, 9 months, it was a tough case. Now it's 15 to 24 months. And so people are afraid if they let their green cards expire and they don't pass the test, what are they gonna do? So there's just a lot of different, and then stuff in the community. But it's just amazing. Everybody that comes to our office, they're good people. When they call us thieves and rapists and all that, that's not true. We're not. We're like really good people. But anyway, the other thing too is that they're hardworking, they're humble, they're trying to do everything they can. They come in, they get their ITIN number cards, they file income tax. We help with licencia marcada, and that's for license for people who don't have, who are undocumented. And they come in, they bring their documentation, and we are like getting them in there. And I have to tell you what happens in our community, you have to call the state to make these appointments, and you don't have to pay, they're free. You just call up and you get your appointment and you can get the test and whatever. Well, we would call every Monday morning at 8 o'clock and all the appointments were gone. So after like a few months, we're like, oh, this can't be right. So we called the state of Colorado and said, something's wrong here. Well, they did an investigation, and they first of all, they found that there was a woman in Longmont that was charging people like $200 to $250 to make their appointment. And really, the lady was charging the same $250 to $300. And they said, and they told me then, nada. If you don't have money, you don't pay nothing. If you have anything, you give a donation. So what they found out is a woman on the inside would get in at price $7.59 and put apple, orange, banana, all kinds of fruit until she would fill up the quota of the appointments. And so, well, she got fired. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff that we do with immigration, and it's a struggle, and but things are good. I like to talk about the positive, and so that's kind of the stuff that we do with immigration. Thanks.
That we're obviously all immigrants here, no? I mean, we all come from some place. Your family came from some place. I mean, not that we, but our descendants, so we're basically all immigrants, and to hear immigrants bashing immigrants is really sad. I can honestly say that in Boulder County, from 1970, I'm going to say maybe from 1979 on, is when you really started seeing a huge number of newly arrived immigrants, like from Mexico, into the county. Because when I was here in 1970, I could probably count the Mexican Americans or Chicanos in 2 hands, 2 feet, you know. We weren't very many. But now, there's a lot of immigrants in Boulder County. A lot. If you look at the schools, we have instances where we have minority schools. And the majority of the students are Latino immigrants in the schools. One school, Columbine Elementary, had about 75–80% of the student body was Latino. And about 60% of those were immigrants. And another 50% of those were probably English language learners. That's just one school. And if you look at the attendance boundary of Columbine Elementary School, it's all Belmont Road, starting from Belmont View and all the way down where most of your families live in mobile homes. And then you had in Boulder County, Boulder County School District, and Columbine Elementary School, white flight. We're experiencing white flight from schools today because there are immigrant students in the system. It was a problem, it is a problem, but we're trying to fix it. And the 1986 amnesty law really provided opportunities and benefit for the immigrant community. I can recall when I used to teach citizenship classes and English classes, because those were the 2 elements to be able to get a permanent resident card, to take those things. And here at CU Boulder, we had classes that were full of immigrants taking classes so that they could become permanent residents. So the history of immigrants in Boulder County, really, I mean, the recently arrived immigrants really started around 1978 into today, yeah. And if you look at the immigrants, I can go to Craig, Colorado, and you have immigrants in Craig, Colorado, and most of them are from Jalisco, the state of Jalisco. For some reason, they follow their families, okay? And if you go to here in our county, well, you have them from all over, but a lot of them are from Chihuahua. Okay. So and all of them are very hardworking. And the good thing about Boulder County is become so sensitive to this, okay? The Justice Department, the Sheriff's Department, the police departments are sensitive to it, that it has become a very protective county for immigrants here, to an extent, because they understand. But it doesn't happen alone. It happens only because you have Chicano activists. The Chicano activism really makes a difference. And I'm saying Chicano activism because it started way back in the 60s and into now, where it's the Chicano activist that raises issues, raises awareness to support the community, the Latino community, the immigrant community, etc. So I am very concerned, and sometimes we forget that Chicanismo, that Chicano activism is the beginning of all of the fixing of the injustices in the U.S. the civil rights issues that occurred way back in the 60s, where they were putting kids in special education because they only speak Spanish, was a big issue. They fixed that, or they tried to fix that. There's still some disproportionality around Latino kids being placed in special education, not like it was before, but it's still there. So there's a lot of issues, okay? But right now, we have sanctuaries in Boulder. We have one person in sanctuary in Boulder. She got released from sanctuary. And thanks to all of the support that she got from CERT, from lawyers and the church. Yeah, it's been a long haul for the immigrant community.
Can I just add
Yes,
something?
please.
So people always ask me, because it's like, I tell people, you know, my parents, and when I said to Richard, no, we've been here like forever, we were the original Mexicanos, we didn't cross the border, they crossed us, I already said that. But what's interesting, you know, when Richard talks about the people that come from Mexico, I always ask them, well, first of all, let me say this, and I'll say this. So people ask me, what are you? Well, it depends. If I'm with the Mexicano community, I'm Mexican American. If I'm with the students, I'm usually a Chicana. And so like I tell people, my mom and dad had 7 kids, and we got Mexican, Mexican American, Spanish, Latino, Chicana, Latina, Latinx. That's a new one for me. I still can't get used to that. So I'm like, you know, I'm straight Latinx, but I'm a Chicana. Because, you know, I was just on the people from my work that I came in with. I remember getting tear gassed right here where the where they play basketball. The cops were on this side and students were on that side, and we were just kind of being nosy and watching them. And then they gassed us all. So yeah, I feel like I earned that Chicana title.
Thank you both. I think we have about 15 minutes left, so if there are any questions from the audience, we'll take those. And if not, I have one. Yes.
This is for all 3 panelists. What one change would you make to the environment in Boulder County to make it better for Latinos and Chicanos and immigrants?
Could maybe repeat the question for the people on Zoom?
Sure, so what one change would the panelists make to make life better for Latinos or Chicanos in Boulder County?
Well, from where I'm at, education, and we're doing it, and we're making it, but it takes effort to make changes in such a complex institution like the school district. Boulder Valley School District finally has a Latino Parent Advisory Council that never existed before in my years of being here in Boulder County, that advises the superintendent of schools. We implemented a equity council in Boulder Valley School District that makes recommendations to the Board of Education, to the administration, and then the Board of Education. So the change I would focus on personally would be improving our educational system so that we can provide more opportunities for Latinos and for other BIPOC students to succeed. Because if they don't succeed in education, boy, we're in trouble. And that's the one place that I think will level the playing field for economic growth, social growth, political growth, and that's my focus. And I think that's a huge one that we need to look at.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, as far as Lafayette, what I'd like to see, more hiring of Latinos in the police department, the fire department, and city hall. And as far as the Latinas and Latinos that we do have working, they're only part-time. They need insurance benefits, not just 30 hours a week. That's a great injustice that's going on within our community right there in Lafayette. And it's been going on for many, many years. We don't have that many even within our city. And we need more, to be able to present, as far as the different problems that we've had within our community for many years, and to help out the poor Latinos that don't understand as far as the justice system, as far as, even within the school system here. The racial discrimination, it's getting better, but it's still there. It is still there. But I think it's very important to have more Latinos hired within the community of Lafayette.
Thanks, Frank.
Tyra, you're the last one, because you want to say ditto. We got another ditto. I think part of it is a few things. One, teach people to be kind. I think that's kind of the biggest thing. The other thing is ask people, how did you get here? Where, I know somebody who, they said one of the biggest smugglers of Chicanos back into the United States was an elderly white couple. And they put them in their trunk. They never asked them. They would just flag them on through, and they bring all the Mexicanos in their trunk. And that was one way they came in. Other ones struggled walking the desert and almost died. And so, just learning their story and just treating them with respect. I think that's, respect and dignity. And honoring speaking two languages. Don't just assume, like sometimes I'll go places and now I'm better, but back they'd say stuff to me and I would say, I don't speak Spanish, or I'll say that again. If they talk slow, so speaking English, speaking Spanish. I was talking with Bourbon when she said, every other country, they have to learn 1, 2, 3 languages. We're so focused on English only. And also people can say Spanish backwards, but that doesn't count. So, it's kind of the, honor that second language, so.
Thank you all. You have another question? Yes, green shirt.
I have a question for Mr. Garcia. So I know that you brought up Uma Simecha and Chicano activists. Do you mind sharing a little bit of a story about the states of Boulder and how important it is to the Boulder community, if you know the history of them?
Well, I was here as a student when that happened, and it was very, very sad to say. There's been a lot of speculations, thank you, as it relates to Los Seis, and the story that I still hold true to my heart is that somebody placed a bomb in the car, and authorities knew about it. Because one story that I heard is that there were emergency vehicles already parked on baseline when it happened, before it happened. The significance about Los Seis in Boulder is probably more within the student population than with your general population. Because I think the general population of Boulder probably doesn't know that much about Los Seis. Boulder County, less about Los Seis. So it's really the student population. I think for me, being a student, it really motivated me to want to do what I'm doing today, because it was such an unfortunate thing that happened, for no reason. And there's a song that was written by my best friend, Agustin Cordova, about Los Seis to Boulder. And if you haven't heard it, you should hear it. There's a lot of speculation about Los Seis and the sacrifice that was made because they lost their life. It was very sad, and I don't know what else to say about that.
That's a really good question. History Colorado is actually organizing a roundtable of activists who were on the Boulder campus or around the Boulder campus when Los Seis happened. the brother of one of the people who was killed, as well as some of the Chicano activists from the campus. So if you're interested, you can talk to me afterwards. Yeah, there was one more question. Yes.
Yeah, I think a theme running through all of your conversations was empowerment and liberation through education. And I know adversity sort of comes in cycles, and education's become a battleground again, with people are throwing around critical race theory, even when they don't know what it is. But could you just speak to either your personal efforts or the importance of resistance just either in Boulder County or Colorado as a whole to push back against the suppression of marginalized people's history?
Say something, since this happened recently. You know, I think when you're Latino, it's really important to pull up more Latinos. You know, we were given that opportunity. So just yesterday or the day before, I had a young lady, her GPA is like 3.6 or 7 or something, and she does extracurricular stuff. Nobody in her school was helping her with applying for scholarships. So I got on the computer and I pulled up all this stuff about all these Latino scholarships, and I did one for her to show her, and they sent back, oh, you just got $2,000. I said, you know, you get about 10, 20 of these will be set. So I think we that have been there before help our gente and our students that are not getting up from their high schools. You know, when you're in high school, they say, oh, go to like Votech and learn how to cut hair. They don't say, you finished your math in 9th grade, don't take more math. You don't need it anyway. And then you come to college and you struggle. And when I first came to CU, I almost quit because I thought, I know this is gonna sound crazy. I really thought white people were way smarter than us Latinos. And I would study. By the time I got probably into my 3rd year, I would have white students say to me, how are you so smart? Were you born smart? No, I just studied my butt off. But anyway, so that's the kind of thing I think, help people that you know, has your counselor talk to you. Things like that I think would be cool.
I think we're lucky here in Colorado because it hasn't reached the level that it has in other states around the issue of critical race theory. We have a progressive state legislature that I don't think would let that happen if a law or something like that would be proposed at our state legislature. We have somewhat of a progressive governor who, if it did happen, would probably veto it. We have school boards, at least in Boulder Valley School District, a very progressive school board that doesn't worry too much about critical race theory because it's a non-issue for us in Boulder Valley. We're moving ahead in bringing more opportunities, whether it be opportunities in curriculum, opportunities for more bilingual education in Boulder Valley. That could be considered from some of your really crazies out there, some aspect of critical race theory. What's happening at Centaurus High School. If we were like in other states where people are crazy about critical race theory, they probably wouldn't let that happen. So no, I think for us in Boulder Valley School District, CRT is right now it's a non-issue.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Any final question? Yes.
I sit on the board at El Comité, so I work with Donna on a regular basis, and we recently got a grant from a group out of Denver called Adelante, and we met with other other charitable groups all across the state of Colorado. And from Antonito, there were 3 people there at this conference when we all met each other initially, and what they did was they forced the Board of Education to add Latino history as part of the curriculum starting in middle school. And we can talk about good education and helping each other up, but sometimes I think our kids need something to be proud of too. And I think the state of Colorado has an obligation to teach that history as well as be fair in the education for all children. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. You know that the Constitution of the state of Colorado dictates that schools need to teach the historical contributions of Latino students and Native American students, or Latinos and Native Americans, okay. There's a state law, I believe, it has passed, or it's turned into a commission or something, where schools will be required to teach the history, contributions of different groups like Latinos, African Americans, Asians, and Native Americans. In our school district, we have a curriculum department that's looking into a number of possibilities at the moment to be able to implement histories of and contributions of other individuals like Latinos and African Americans. And we have a very, very strong equity council that is making recommendations to that effect. Antonito is, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened until now probably, but Antonito is like about, what, 95% Latino? Okay, and the school board is probably 100% Latino. So, you know, I guess I'm a little bit surprised to hear the statement in terms of they're finally doing it.
They shared that with us in this
Yeah.
large group setting.
Yeah, but it's not, well, I guess it's not too surprising because you have to remember that state laws and state assessments and all of that, state report cards, all of that get in the way, and people think that if you bring something in like that, it's going to take away from core curriculum items that we have to have, the standards and, you know, all that wonderful stuff that we have today. So it's probably not too surprising that they haven't been able to do anything like that until now. Because especially the school districts in the valley, they're under so much pressure to do these things that and they don't have the resources. They don't have the resources that a district like Boulder Valley School District has. I mean, when you have a superintendent that's probably a principal, that probably drives buses on top of that, you know? I mean, it's not the best place to be a school administrator.
Thank you. And we have to wrap up right now. So I want to thank the panelists for their passion.
I also want to thank the panelists. It's been a fantastic discussion tonight. So thank you very much. Just a few announcements for continuing legal education credits. We have a sign that you can take a picture of if you're here, or we will post on our website information to get your CLE credits. We will be posting a link to the video recording from tonight in a few weeks, and we will be posting other resources regarding Latino history in Boulder County to our website in the coming days. We will have a fourth panel discussion that we are currently in the midst of planning, and we stay tuned for announcements about that, which you'll get over email. Thank you all very much for being here and joining us tonight.